being creative keeps you young, I think, and being involved. I love what I do, so I don't call it work. People say, when are you going to retire? And I started giving me a complex. So I said, I'm not going to retire, I'm just going to refire. And by continuing to do something new, I challenge people all the time. When was the last time you did something for the first time? And I challenge myself with that. When was the last time I did something for the first time? Because that keeps you curious, keeps you creative, and I think it keeps you young. You know, I could stop what I'm doing and be just fine financially, but I enjoy it. So why would I stop something that brings me joy?
Welcome to Burning the Ships podcast, and I'm your host, Jason Seward. And today I am probably as excited as I've ever been to have a guest on this show. And before I get into an introduction of who today's guest is, I'm going to share a little bit of a story to kind of frame my excitement. So in 2016, as a lot of my audience know, I was still working in my W-2 career in corporate America, and I was at a point where that career was very good. It was very comfortable, relatively high paying. It was a very secure career. I didn't hate my job or anything like that. But deep down, I always knew from the time I was right out of college that there was something more. And I just didn't know what it was, how to pursue it, or anything like that. So fast forward to 2016, my friend and now business partner, Bill Phillips, called me and said that one of his coworkers dropped a book on his desk a few days prior, and he binged it cover to cover and said it was the most impactful book he's ever read, and it has completely shifted everything in his brain. So of course I had to go read the book. So I went on to read it and had the exact same epiphany once I read it. Fast forward, that led us both down a rabbit hole of just researching what our next steps are going to be and how we can build a different type of life with a different type of an approach. And so that led to indulging in many podcasts, listening to audiobooks, reading books, watching YouTube videos, but one common book kept being referenced along the way, and that was the same book we read that kind of ignited this fire in us. Fast forward to 2022, we both left those careers and we went all in on our pursuit of our real estate businesses, which we had been building on the side. But again, this was sparked by that fire back in 2016. In 2023, I launched this podcast called Burning the Ships, which was kind of a play on us burning the ships on those careers. And at this point, I've had over 200 episodes, and over half of my guests, if I went back and counted them, it's probably 60% or more, have referenced this same book as being a pivotal moment in their lives or careers or whatever their paths have been. And I keep hearing this every interview I do. People bring it up, and I'm like, man, here's another one. Here's another one. Well, a few weeks ago, I had David Richter on, and David Richter, again, another guest, brings up this book as being pivotal in his career. And for the first time on the podcast, I stopped him after he brought the book up, and I just said, David, I've had over 100 guests on here bring that book up, and it is unbelievable how powerful a book like that has been to a couple generations of folks, and everybody references it as being so pivotal. I could have brought that up to any of my prior 100 plus guests, but I brought it up to David. He said, I need to make an introduction to the author, to you. And none of my other guests know who the author of this book is personally. So one thing led to another, and David introduces me to Miss Sharon Lechter, and I have her today to share her story, which is way bigger than just that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. But Sharon, I'm excited to have you here and appreciate you taking the time to join me.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm delighted to be with you. It's exciting.
Yep. So I've got a pile of questions in this little brain of mine that I can't wait to get to, but I want to, a lot of times I allow my guests to introduce themselves, which I could certainly do with you, but your resume is so powerful. I would imagine you'll you'll give it with a lot of humility. So I, if you'll indulge me, would like to kind of read an intro for you, and then we'll go from there. So today's guest is a true financial pioneer and legacy architect whose work has reshaped how millions think about money, success, and impact. She's a New York Times bestselling author, entrepreneur, CPA, international speaker, and master mentor. And she co-authored one of the most influential personal finance books in the world, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, a book that has sold tens of millions of copies globally, been translated into more than 50 languages across over 110 countries, and helped spark a lifelong movement around financial literacy. Beyond that flagship title, she's authored or co-authored 14 additional Rich Dad books, led the Rich Dad Company for more than a decade as a co-founder and CEO, and partnered with iconic brands like Disney to extend her influence. She's also served on U.S. presidential advisory councils on financial literacy, collaborated with the Napoleon Hill Foundation to reinvent classic wealth-building principles, and now devotes her life to mentoring leaders to build generational wealth and personal legacy. Please welcome a visionary in education, entrepreneurship, and empowerment, Sharon Lechter. I am so excited, Sharon.
Thank you, Jason. I'm delighted to be with you.
So let's go back, all the way back to the origin story. So where are you from originally?
Well, I was actually born in San Diego. My dad was in the Navy. We lived in Chicago for a few years. But when he retired, we moved to Orlando, Florida, before Disney. And so I really grew up in the Orlando area. And my dad is retired Navy. He was still working for Martin Marietta. We owned rental properties. So I say I've been a real estate investor since I was 11, because I used to have to go scrub out bathrooms between tenants. Yep. And he owned orange groves. And he said, Sharon, the oranges give me cash flow. The land will appreciate in value. And some of those orange groves are now where SeaWorld in Orlando is. So we talked about money at the dinner table. We talked about assets and liabilities. We talked about building wealth through accumulating income-producing assets. It wasn't until I got out into the real world that I realized most people don't have that education. Yep. We're taught to chase a paycheck. As you said, W-2. We're taught to exchange our time for money. And so I started my career in public accounting. I was one of the very first women in public accounting. And a few years into that, I was very successful, but I was a W-2. And I was like, the more successful I became, the less time I had. And so one of my clients invited me to go with him in investing in a company that he was buying out of bankruptcy so I would own a piece of the rock. So I still remember going back to my condo in Atlanta where I started my career doing pros and cons. It didn't help me a bit. I could argue both sides. I was very successful in my career, upwardly mobile, but I had this opportunity and my hand kind of took off across the top of the page and wrote out, why not? And that was in 1979. And so that's still my philosophy today. Why not do something different? Why not solve a problem or serve a need? Why not take that road less traveled? And that continues to be my philosophy now. So why not one? And so I made the decision to leave. It was probably the worst business decision of my life because within weeks of being up there, I found corruption, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my newly minted CPA certificate. But had I not made that decision, I wouldn't have met a young man named Michael Lechter, and we are now celebrating 46 years together. So it was, I tell people all the time, Napoleon Hill said, out of every adversity comes a seed of an equal or greater benefit. I got instant feedback. Sometimes it takes us a while to figure out what the benefit is when we have those missteps. Yeah. But that began a journey of entrepreneurship. And you talked about Disney. I met the inventor of the first talking children's books that had the sound strips down the side, and helped him grow that around the world. And we did that because it was a new technology. Back in 1987, kids had no screen time. I was dinosaur times, I know, but they had no electronics. And so we were introducing this new thing. How can we get parents to trust us? So we did licensing deals with Disney, Warner Brothers, Sesame Street, and that allowed us to explode that company around the world. And I learned so much about licensing, about publishing, about intellectual property. I happened to also be married to a world famous intellectual property attorney. And so I realized one of the best ways to build income producing assets is from your brain, intellectual property. And so that began a journey of building that company. We sold it. We moved here to Arizona in 1991. And that my oldest child went off to college and left in September, came home in December in credit card debt. I was devastated. I was so mad at him, but I was more mad at myself because I had taught him what my parents had taught me, I thought. But we didn't know he had a credit card. He got to campus and there was a table, free pizza, free money, another one, free t-shirt, free money. He had a really good time his first semester in college. But that was December of 1992, and that's when I dedicated the rest of my career to financial literacy and financial education. Started working with school systems. My hair used to be red. If you've ever worked with school systems, it's white. And I'm starting to lose it. So, that's one of the issues from working with school systems, highly frustration. But that's when I started working on creating curriculum and supporting people. Fast forward a few years, 1996. I met Robert Kiyosaki. He had this idea for a board game. I had the knowledge and the experience and the connections. And so we became partners. We were Rich Dad, Poor Dad together and built the Rich Dad brand around the world, the largest personal finance brand. We were partners for 10 years. I was the founding partner as well as CEO of the company and helped build that around the world using the experience that I'd learned from the Talking Children's book. And in 2007, we were no longer aligned on our personal missions. And so I made the decision to leave. And sometimes I tell people all the time, sometimes you have to close the door for other doors of opportunity to open. Had I not made that decision, I wouldn't have had the call from President Bush. I did not know what my future held. I thought my legacy was Rich Dad, but somebody upstairs said, oh no, there's more for you to do. So I served on the first President's Advisory Council for Financial Literacy for both President Bush and Obama. And in March of 2008, if we know what was happening to the economy back then, I got the call from the Napoleon Hill Foundation. Now, I read Think and Grow Rich when I was 19. And I knew the head of the foundation, Don Green, because we were always at the book fairs together. And he called and had learned that I had left Rich Dad and asked me to help reinvigorate Napoleon Hill's teachings during this time of crisis for the younger generations. Because my definition of young is getting older. Most people under the age of 50 at that time didn't know Napoleon Hill, didn't know about Think and Grow Rich. And so I had the honor of stepping in and did 4 different books, best-selling books with the Napoleon Hill Foundation: 3 Feet from Gold, Outwitting the Devil, Think and Grow Rich for Women, and Success is Something Greater. And that's just led me on to additional projects. Inc. Magazine, I did a book called Exit Rich. And with Wealth Wave Media, I did How Money Works for Women. And I literally just released this last month a new book called Old Wealth, New Wealth, True Wealth, which was really about building your legacy.
Sharon, you have just given me 5 hours of questions. So let me unpack that. And I'm going to go back a little bit. That obviously is a unprecedented resume. I mean, that is fantastic. And I've got a bunch of questions around it. So let's go back. You mentioned you started that story with your father and kind of having those conversations around the dinner table. Because of Rich Dad, Poor Dad and a lot of your teachings, we do the same thing with my children. I have a 14 and a 9-year-old, and we talk openly about money. It's not a taboo topic. It's something we talk about, and they're little, but they're learning, and that's. But I read a quote from you, or I guess it was your father's quote, but you said you still ask yourself this every day, and it goes something like this question: wouldn't the world be a better place if we all focus on adding value to other people's lives? And it sounds like that was just drilled into your brain as a very young child. and you have lived a lifetime asking yourself, seems like every day, how you can live up to that and answer that question, and you've done so. So
Yeah,
take us back.
he would ask me every night, Sharon, have you added value to someone's life today?
Yeah,
And he's been gone 20 years this month, but I still ask myself that every night. Have I added value to somebody's life today?
I love that. What, as a young child, what did that mean to you? Did you comprehend the value of that question?
I think is understanding that it's what you give, not what you take, that creates a life of impact and value.
Yeah. And I ask that selfishly as a father. You know, I try to instill these things into my children, and sometimes you wonder, are they listening? Are they hearing it? And I know they are, and I know they'll reflect back, years later. But that's fascinating. As you matured into your adult life and your career, you mentioned you burned the ships on your career, to move into other things. But you were doing this at a time you mentioned. In the 70s. So, but you were doing this at a time where females had the deck stacked against you, had the deck stacked against you quite a bit. So, that being said, in the niche and the industry that you were in, did you wear that as a chip on your shoulder for motivation, or how did you view that going through the world in which you were in?
When I started, I was the only woman in my accounting classes, and most of my business classes. As I said, I was one of the very first women in public accounting. And so I was raised, my dad would say, Sharon, if you want to do something, sometimes you just have to do what it takes to succeed. And I recognized that if I wanted to succeed, I had to work harder than the guys that started with me. It wasn't a resentment, it was a challenge. I wanted to prove myself. And I did. And so one of the reasons I wrote Think and Grows for Women was I was getting tired of hearing all the women complaining and criticizing the men in their lives or the men standing in their way. Because if you're a student of Napoleon Hill and you understand the law of positive attraction, if you're complaining and criticizing, what are you attracting?
Yeah.
So I wanted to change the dialogue and say, women, stop complaining and criticizing, but let's start celebrating the progress we've made. Is there more progress that needs to be made? Yes. But we've come a long way, baby. So let's, celebrate what we've done, and let's celebrate the men that support us and open doors for us. Jason, I love working with men. So I don't want, I'm not going to, having a chip on your shoulder hurts no one but you. It's additional weight on your scale, right? So allow yourself to release the negativity, release the anger, and start making positive strides, because we can control three things, Jason: our thoughts, our words, our actions. If your thoughts are negative and anger, then you're going to have angry words and negative words, and you're going to have negative reactions. And so if you can change that and change yourself to one of positive thoughts and positive words, you'll get positive reactions.
I love that. When you were, and I expected that to be your answer. I did not expect you to, operate from this standpoint of, I'm going to view all this negativity around women and lean into that. And so I'm glad you answered it that way. I love the thoughts, words and actions. But I'm curious, like you mentioned, kind of as you walk through every step along the way through your career, you I don't know if you had a natural, and I'm curious to hear your answer to this. Did you have a natural radar to see opportunity, like to have vision of where something can go and how to get it there? Or was that because it seems like everything you described, you saw something was there and then you were the implementer to take it and blow it up in a positive way, right? The Disney books, or the books you were talking about, the Rich Dad Poor Dad, the Napoleon Hill Foundation, these things were kind of in motion, and then you seem to be the accelerant behind it. So does that come natural to you, or can you elaborate on kind of where that comes from?
Well, thank you, Jason. I appreciate that compliment. I do. One of my superpowers is I can see how to solve problems. I love solving problems. And as I started this conversation about my mantra, why not? Why not solve a problem? What happens is it's usually people talk about passion, right? Love what you do, do what you love. Well, my passion actually comes from anger. When I see something that needs to change, or I'm angry about something, I start another company. And so, trying to solve the financial literacy issue, helping kids getting back into reading. And then even when COVID started, I was mad about all the negativity and fear. So I started a company doing a daily positive motivational message, calling it Sharon's Daily ATM, Abundance, Tips, and Mentorship. And you can go to SharonLechter.com ATM or atm.SharonLechter.com, and I'll give you a free month of my daily messages of positivity and mentoring. So my superpower is I do a lot of high level mentoring as my number one passion now. I have clients that really are ready to go to the next level. In fact, my team over my shoulder here, Legacy of Building Legacies. I love helping other people get to that level of success that they didn't even dream possible for themselves. And that's one of the things I can see with people when I start working with them. They start with a level of success, but I go, let's take you to the next level. Let's take you to that authority level. Let's build your business 10x, 100x so that you can make a stronger and bigger impact. So in answer to your question, I do have the ability to see what other people can't see.
So you've worked with a lot of folks, and when you're talking about taking people to the next level, these are people that are already successful. These are people that have had mega success. And so through all your experience and all of your clients that you've worked with and people you've mentored, can you break out a couple common denominators you see that folks like just the missing piece of the puzzle that you consistently see over and over to get them from already super successful relative to anybody else in their niche, but to still get them to that higher level? What's that missing piece often?
Yeah, well, let me explain first my personal success formula.
Okay.
It's you can go to personalsuccessequation.com and get this ebook that helps you walk through your own personalsuccessequation.com. And it's really the formula is your passion times your talent, right? Passion plus talent. And for me, again, I told you that was from anger, but love what you do, what you love, and your talent. I had my passion, which was angry that we weren't teaching our kids about money in school. My talent was years as a CPA, years in publishing. And most of us stop there. We think we have to do it on our own. But true success comes with passion plus talent times a power of association. That is, again, my superpower. And when we talk about helping my clients, I really focus on powers of association. Who's on your team? Who's helping you move to the next level? Who are your mentors? Who are your advisors? And sometimes the advisors you've had to get you to where you are today need to change to different advisors to get you to the next level. So your passion plus your talent times power of association times A for action, taking action. How many times do we know what we're supposed to do? We just don't do it. And so your passion plus your talent times power of association times action, and all of it wrapped with a plus F, and that's faith. Faith in yourself, faith in what you're doing, faith that is needed and necessary, and faith that you will succeed. Well, 9 times out of 10, that F is actually fear. And fear paralyzes us or motivates us. And most of us are paralyzed by fear, and it prevents us from doing what we know we need to do. And so I help people turn that fear into focus, and that focus into fuel, and it becomes faith and helps them take that next level. But I also focus on making sure they have elevated their authority in their industry through the power of association. As I said, as you indicated, most of them are already successful. They just need to get a bump up to that next level. And it's usually through power of association, becoming an authority in their industry, attracting new clients to them because of their position of authority. And I just am thrilled when I see a client go to that next level.
Yeah, I love that. You speak, you're so articulate with how you explain these things. And I know you have really a lifetime of being on a number of stages. You've spoken all across this globe thousands of times. Do you remember your first time on stage in front of a big group?
In front of a big group, yes. It was our release of Rich Dad Poor Dad and the Cash Flow Game. We were at an event, 25,000 people for Amway in St. Louis, and Robert was speaking, but Dexter Yeager, who was the guru for Amway, said, I want to bring on somebody that is the powerhouse behind this, and none of this would have happened without her. And he brought me up on stage to say a few words, which was just wonderful. And, and it's important to recognize the people that support you and get you where you want to go. And I will forever appreciate that Dexter did that. And it's something that's, we don't do it alone. That power of association is so, so very important. Rich Dad would not have become the number one global brand if it hadn't been for both Robert and me. And It's something that's important for people to recognize, that you need to have the right people around you and the right people on your team.
When you got involved with the Rich Dad, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I understand the story is the book was written to promote the game. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, and the book ended up being the thing. What was the turning point? When did you guys realize, like, with the book, it's more than just promoting this game?
Well, I met Robert at a beta test for the board game, and because of my connections with the Talking Children's book, and we had games as well, I just volunteered to help them commercialize it, because it was drawn out on a piece of butcher block paper. Different plain pieces were different size caliber bullets. I mean, it was really at the beginning stages, and I helped him get that to the point where we could produce it. And in that process, he told me he was going to charge $200 for the game. I said, well, it's kind of pricey. Maybe you should write a brochure to market the game. And that's when he asked me to be his partner in both the game and to help him write that brochure. And that brochure was Rich Dad Poor Dad. We never expected to take on a life of its own.
Yeah.
And when you asked me about what moment did we realize, well, we printed 1,000 copies that we launched in April of 1997. And a few weeks later, we'd sent some to friends. One had a car wash in Austin. He wouldn't buy them, but he put a per consignment. And I got a call from this guy. His name is Bill Galvin. He was a diamond in Amway. And he said, well, how many books do you have? And I went, about 950, because we'd given away some. And he said, I'll take them all. And he had sent one to Dexter Yeager. And so all of a sudden we went from 1,000 books, we printed 5,000 and then 10,000 and then 50,000. And we realized we needed support to be able to meet the demand. But we got to the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Business Week, all the bestseller lists in early 2020. And that's when we realized that the book was really the brand.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible. And I as I open this, it's been a common theme, not just for myself, had a major impact on me personally, but in my business. But the reason you're here and the reason I'm talking to you is because it just continues to come up, and it's the messaging in the book, which you had obviously a big part of, but the whole messaging around the brand and everything, it will live forever. Like that, those are time-tested principles that worked 100 years ago, and they'll work for the next 100 years. And I think that's why it resonates so well.
Yeah, many of the lessons in Rich Dad Poor Dad incorporate the things that I learned from my father. So
yeah, and I love that piece of the story as well. wasn't aware of that. So now I want to switch gears a little bit, and you mentioned, I mean, it's public on your website, so I know you don't mind me sharing, but you're 72, is that correct?
Just turned 72 in January, yes, sir.
You just mentioned that you have another book that just released, and I want to talk about that book in a second, but I do have a question before we get into that, Sharon. You're 72. I would imagine you have no financial need to keep being out here grinding, writing books, doing all that you're doing. So what is your why now, at this stage of life, where I can clearly see you are still energetic about it, you're still motivated, you're still building that legacy. What drives you to continue doing that?
Well, when I finish with you today, I have a client call, and we're looking at them create a huge development in Nashville. Being creative keeps you young, I think, and being involved. I love what I do, so I don't call it work. People say, when are you going to retire? And I started giving me a complex. So I said, I'm not going to retire. I'm just going to refire. And by continuing to do something new, I challenge people all the time. When was the last time you did something for the first time? And I challenge myself with that. When was the last time I did something for the first time? Because that keeps you curious, keeps you creative, and I think it keeps you young. I could stop what I'm doing and and be just fine financially, but I enjoy it. So why would I stop something that brings me joy? It brings me joy to help other people take their business to the next level. It brings me joy. My co-author of the new book you mentioned, which is Old Wealth, New Wealth, True Wealth, he's 26 years old. And at the age of 16, he was a nationally ranked cyclist and had aspirations to go to the Olympics. And he was on a training run with his coach out in New Mexico and was hit by a car going 60 miles an hour. The young man, he was pronounced dead on the scene. They were able to revive him. His parents were told he was dead. But he was partially paralyzed. He was in the hospital for a couple of months. And he could have given up on life, because his cycling career was definitely over. But he took that same discipline, that drive. He read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And at 26, he has a multi-million portfolio in real estate. And he also has a passion to share his knowledge with his younger generation. I want to support that. It's a joy for me to elevate him and introduce him to my network. We just had a book launch here in January, and I had Tom Hopkins there, Mark Victor Hansen, Rita Davenport, Ken McElroy, some of the titans in the speaking and real estate industry, to be able to help open him to and introduce him, that power of association, to the network where he can truly find stages and opportunities to share his message with the younger generation. And that's is pure joy for me to see that, to elevate others. I have a dear friend who is my best friend for 30 years. She says to elevate people to the point of highest potential for them. And that's truly what I love to do.
Yeah. Well, one thing, first of all, it sounds like I've got somebody else I need to meet to get on this podcast, because that sounds like he has his own story that would be fantastic. But um, I'll ask this question. Well, I'll hold that for a second. Let's talk about the new book. What are some of the principles or the foundation of this book? And if you want to share that, I know it's been out a couple months, you said.
No, just a few weeks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's called Old Wealth, New Wealth, True Wealth. We actually released it on January 23rd, 2026, which is the 10th anniversary of Nathan's accident. So it was a very special date. And talks about the three different types of wealth. Old wealth, which is slow and steady accumulation over time. All right. New wealth, doing the shiny objects and fast results, getting your name out there, a celebrity brand. And then true wealth is a combination of the first two, but also understanding that true wealth is not what you accumulate over time, it's who you become along the way. And that true wealth, I have a lot of very, very rich friends who've lost their health, they've lost their family along the way because they did not focus on what truly is important to live a true wealth life. And it's really easy to see that in people. And it's something that we have to take a step back and say, who do I want to become in the process? And it's a parable spoken. I do own a ranch here in Arizona called cherrycreeklodge.com if you want to check it. And it's totally off the grid. It's out in the middle of the Tonto National Forest. And we host our business mentoring retreats there. It's also open to the public, and you can take your own retreats or your own family reunions. It's a little piece of heaven. Totally off the grid, all solar power. We have 500 head of Black Angus cattle and all kinds of horses, and we have a shooting range. It's a really fun place to go.
Sounds like heaven.
Yeah, it is heaven. And so the book is actually set at the ranch because Nathan came to a retreat and he experienced it. And it talks about a reunion of he and his three brothers, the two brothers. These three young men, three brothers, were each gifted tracts of land by their dad when he passed. And it was a process of the older brother, Olden, followed old wealth. The Newman, who is the second brother, followed new wealth. And then Nathan is true wealth. And they come back together and they learn from each other. They talk about where they've been. And it's a process where people reading the book can identify things that they've done correctly. They can identify things that they might be open to doing in the future. I share the knowledge of power of association. My husband is very involved in our mentoring retreats. He talks about the importance of intellectual property. So really the book is a thesis in building true wealth in your life. And I'm very, very proud of it. And they were released it. We actually originally released the ebook on my birthday, January 12th. And that we hit 7 number one best-selling categories in the U.S., 3 in Canada, and 2 in the U.K. So very proud of that. But it's continuing to really reach people and open their eyes to some decisions that maybe they've made that they need to change, or some new opportunities that they can pursue.
I love that. I can't wait. As soon as I get off of here, it's going to be in my Amazon, orders and on the way. I can't wait to read it. Sharon, this journey you've been on for so many years certainly hasn't come without adversity, right? And a lot of folks, whether you're an entrepreneur or whatever your path may be, there is adversity along the way. And I know, and again, I bring this up because it was on your website, so I feel like it's okay to ask, but you faced the ultimate adversity with one of your children back in 2012. Do you care to share about that and how you mentally work through that, and then how you carry on his legacy or your child's legacy from that point?
Yeah, December 14th, 2012, we lost our youngest son. He was 30 at the time, but there's nothing worse. There's nothing that particularly apparent. There's no worse tragedy. Everything else goes away. You don't have stress anymore because nothing compares to that kind of level of pain. And my life went into neutral for several years. I was pretty much numb. And I thought about retiring, but I got a lot of pushback from family and friends. And I also heard my son in my ear saying, "Mom, get over it. There's more for you to do." And it triggered me to understand I had a choice to make. I could continue being numb and really just not contributing to life and really aging. I could feel myself aging, or I could make a commitment to go back to adding value to people's lives. And so that's kind of where I came up from. Instead of retiring, I needed to refire. And I launched a private Facebook group called the Play Big Movement, because I said, if I'm going to play big again, I want to share that with people so that they could play big again as well. And that started my drive to continue adding value. And I released Outwitting the Devil during that time, which was hugely important and hugely impactful to me, understanding that I was letting the devil, letting negativity hold me down, and that I had a choice. I could think positive thoughts and do positive things in the world. I can't change the fact that I lost my son. It will never lose me. I will never leave the pain and of not having my child here, but I know that I can help others along the way.
I love that. I love your perspective there and how you turn that into, and it seems to be a common theme with you, just focus on the positive and where we can go with that. And I'm sure that that particular example didn't come as easy as everything else, obviously, that you've faced in life. Um, I can't I can't let you get out of here. Anytime I have somebody tell me they've been married 40 plus years, I can't let you get out of here without asking this question. So it's a simple question. What advice do you have to my generation? I'm 44 years old. I've been married 17 years. But what marriage advice do you have folks in my situation that are, happily married, raising kids, trying to pursue all these business dreams and goals? Give me some marriage advice, Sharon.
Well, I feel like I have to add, since we just talked about losing my son, marriages typically don't survive the loss of a
Yeah.
child. And my husband and I did, because we've learned along the way that you have to respect your spouse even more than you love them. And I can honestly say my husband and I, it was love at first sight. I met him at the company that I'd left public accounting for, but he was a lawyer on the opposite side of a lawsuit. So it was an interesting time for us to get together. But we were married 9 months after we met, and I can still say he's the smartest man I've ever met. I have tremendous respect for him. There are days when when the love gets challenged, and that's when the respect steps in. So and things are too easy to get in and out of these days, but marriage is a commitment of the heart and a commitment of the soul. And as I said, it's been 46 years that we've been together, and every single day I think my lucky stars for having him in my life. And I think it's very important for us to realize, it's a two-way street. There are days when I'm sure he wants nothing to do with me, and there are days I want nothing to do with him. But there's never a day that we don't have total respect and admiration for each other.
Yeah. My wife told me this was early in our marriage, but we're in this. There's gonna be days where we get tired of each other, and on those days, go take a nap. Like, it's but I love that. I with all your accomplishments, and we could talk for hours on all of them and dissect every one of them and give people inspiration and stuff like that. The thing that stands out to me the most is what you just shared, and overcoming that adversity, the ultimate adversity of losing a child. I can't imagine it. Myself or for my mother having to deal with that or anything like that. So, I respect the heck out of you and your husband for getting through that and on the other end. So I kind of asked this earlier, and we'll start wrapping things up because I want to be respectful of your time. But you've been on this journey for so many years, and you've done so many wonderful things and continue to do so. And I know this last book is just one more thing leading to the next thing. It sounds like it's not gonna end. But let me frame the question a little bit, because I spent so many years in my W-2 career, as I mentioned earlier, just having this. I kind of suppressed it, but it was in the back of my mind that I was meant for more. I was meant to do more. But I was so focused on a destination of retirement, right? Just grind through this career for the next 30 years until I get to, that's the journey, until I get to this destination of retirement. And it wasn't until I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, I really changed my focus on everything till I started realizing that the destination, there's no reason the journey can't be the destination. Get on a journey that I'm so excited to be in that I don't ever want it to end. So I'll say that to ask you this. Is there a destination you have in mind in life, or is your journey that you're on the destination?
Well, I think just as I said, when was the last time we did something for the first time? The journey is life, right? You think you have a goal, you get there, the destination, you realize that there's so much more beyond that. So why a destination is an end point? Who wants an end point, right?
Yep.
Enjoy every single day. I have an 8-year-old granddaughter, and I think, okay, I'm 72, she's 8. Gosh, I'm gonna, I'm gonna be really old when she graduates from college. I need to do whatever I can to make sure that I'm still as vital as possible so that I can be there to celebrate her and see her grow. Because at the end of the day, people come and go in your life, but your family is your family. And, I lost my son. I have my other 2 children, my grandchildren, and I just cherish every moment that I have with them. And so it's important, destination is great. Celebrate when you reach a destination, but then what's next?
Yep.
Because that destination means finality. Don't think of finality. Think of next journey, next experience, next opportunity to experience something new that you've never done before.
I love that. My wife's grandfather, we're celebrating his 97th birthday this weekend. And, but I remember back before my daughter was born, so that would have been 15 years ago, having a conversation with him. So at the time he was 82, and he was as healthy at 82 than any of my friends. I mean, he was just a virus. And I asked him, and he was, special forces in the Army, and then he went on to have a, long career and retired from that. But I asked him, what keeps you moving and healthy? He said, I've been motivated since I retired from his second career I want to be able to roll on the floor with my great grandkids and throw them up in the air and for as long as I possibly can. And he's 97 and still doing that. He still gets on the floor with them. He still plays with them. And that motivation, it's kind of like the journey, the goalposts move. At one point he was probably focused on a career and raising his own children and seeing his own grandchildren. But now I want to be around and vibrant and healthy enough to play with these great grandkids as long as I can. And that motivated me too, right? I have a long time before I get to that point, but I want to be that. I don't ever want to let go of my health and my mind if I have control over it, because I want to see those
your
things.
grandpa. That's true wealth.
Yeah.
True
right.
wealth. That's what he's
Exactly.
earning right now.
Exactly right. So, Sharon, I could not be more grateful for this conversation. You have very little to gain coming on this podcast, other than just talking to somebody new on a small platform. But I have internally, me personally, have so much to gain from this, and I cannot wait to share it with my audience because of what I led into this with, how much of an impact, not just that book, but everything else you've shared. It is a story of all the way from like going back to the 70s, doing this as a female. I know you didn't wear it as a chip, but that's adversity in itself. And you just, with this why not mentality, have just grinded all the way to this point, and you'll continue to do so. And if folks can't find inspiration from that, then I don't know where else they're going to find it. So with that, Sharon, I cannot thank you enough. I'm very appreciative, and I'm glad our paths were able to cross.
So am I, Jason. Thank you so much. You're a bright light, and I know that you're impacting so many people with your podcast and the other things that you're doing. So thank you so much for inviting me, and you made me emotional. So here we go.
Well, I thank you. And we have a big networking event tonight in our area, and I'm going to order probably 5 books as soon as I get done with this, and we're going to give away a few as door prizes. So I'm excited about that. Can't wait to dive into it myself. And again, thank you for joining me on Burning the Ships.
Well, thank you so much, and congratulations on a successful podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Burning the Ships. I want to give a special thanks to our sponsor, 608B Capital, helping real estate investors secure fast, reliable funding to fuel their boldest moves. If you're ready to take your investing to the next level, visit 608bcapital.com to learn more. If you found value in today's episode, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but it also helps us reach more people who are ready to burn the ships and commit fully to their goals. And don't forget to share the episode with someone who needs that extra push to take bold action. I'll leave you with this. burning the ships isn't just about removing the option to retreat. It's about unlocking the courage to charge forward. No matter the odds, the past is behind you and the future is yours to conquer. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time on Burning the Ships.